transparency and
Mhm.
authenticity matter more than anything. And literally, this is why Shelf Sense was started, because I had a student say to me, I just want to know more about the company that I'm buying products from. It's not enough to see their advertising or their product label or the website even. I want to know like what matters to them, and is it consistent with how I feel? And so that's legit. And I think that's going to be the future for a lot of brands, that they have to think about that.
This is The Naturalist. In every episode, we're covering the products, ideas, and trends that are shaping the CPG industry.
Or that we just really like.
Our guest today is Cynthia Barstow, founder of Protect Our Breasts, an on-campus student organization that shares information about environmental toxins that contribute to breast cancer. Cynthia is currently a professor at UMass and host of the podcast Shelf Sense, the stories behind our stuff.
Well, so we know each other so well from your work at Protect Our Breasts, and so much of the work that you did there was about educating young consumers and all of the women and young men who were working with you, educating people on the ingredients in their products, in packaging, and plastics was such a big piece of that, endocrine disruptors.
Right?
So like that also is so your world.
Yeah, you probably already knew that gum has plastic in it.
Well, it kind of did. But yes, but there are so many of those things in a variety of our products that people don't really realize. I just had on the podcast the other day Carol Levine from Lotus Foods and a Gen Z person, which is what I do with the podcast. And my young student was just bowled over by what a huge impact rice has on our climate. So there are all these kinds of stories behind our stuff, which is what Shelf Sense, my podcast, is all about. But talking with students and having their eyes pop out of their heads when they learn about these things that the natural and organic industry has been dealing with for so long. I'm just so grateful that we get to be in it and be a part of changing the world. We're so fortunate.
It is. It's always such a good reminder, right? And that there's always more to learn, always more for us to learn, but then constantly educating people and sharing ideas and insights. And that was one of the reasons one of the many reasons we wanted you to be on the podcast today, because you have your amazing podcast. We know you through your work in the industry and now at universities, and you're really our connection to today's youth.
Yes. Yeah.
Is basically also because you're working with students all the time, you're getting their feedback on these issues and, you're imparting your wisdom on them. And I know you're learning a ton from your students. So you wanted to take some of the issues that Adrienne and I have been looking at, talking about, and hear from you, like, what are people saying about these things? So that's really interesting, the conversation on, rice and climate. We also, you and I, Cynthia, were talking about like protein and sports nutrition. So there's a couple topics we want to dig into.
Sure. I'm so fascinated to speak with my students about these things, because although I do kind of read the data, like I'm up on Mintel and market research, some of the other sources, I'm so fascinated to hear the actual on the ground information from students. Like, how is it really in your day to day? And they're excited to share. And I do. You're absolutely right. My students are my greatest teachers.
Well, which topic should we start with?
I do have some protein information if
Yeah,
you'd like
let's
me
hear
to
it.
like have a way with that.
Yeah, I think that's important, Cynthia, because we, of course, we've been talking so much about protein. We're seeing all of the different market manifestations, both in the natural products industry, but just out there in the world, whether it be at Starbucks, at Costco.
Right.
Protein is everywhere. Like, when will that bubble pop, or is it like going to go strong? And so we're like, well, what are students saying about that? How are they engaging with this protein category? So yes, let's start with that one.
So on the big picture level, this has been really fascinating because I have asked a number of people, and to start with, there's been a shift from it's uncool to look strong, which I never even considered that it was uncool to look strong, but apparently young women were like, oh, I don't want to have muscles. I don't want to like look like too, strong. And that's shifted now. It's considered a body image that is fit and being strong and lifting and all of those things that we kind of equate with kind of looking buff or whatever you want to refer to it as. That has switched, and so now women really do care. And the other thing that has really come up is the technology. And I think we were talking about this, Jessica, that they are overwhelmed with two different things, which is so funny to me. They have the TikTok world with everybody and their brother telling them exactly what to do at all times that have absolutely kind of no research behind it. And then they have the technology, all of the apps that are available, sure, all those fitness apps and whatnot. But now they have more data, and they are very much data driven. And now, granted, I work in a business school, so our whole thrust has been trying to expose students to the idea that data is really important for making decisions and whatnot. But they actually have moved towards that data thing in a big way. So they've been doing this thing called in-body scans. And some of that, I guess, these units that look very much like not a treadmill, but kind of like some kind of stand up, step on kind of thing. Um, they will give you a tremendous amount of information. Like aura rings are hot and watches are hot and all that kind of stuff. But these body scans apparently tell you an awful lot more, and they tell you how much protein you need, which I think is very
Wow.
interesting. And one of my students is working with a coach, and not she's not an athlete, she's not a D1 athlete or anything, but she's working with a coach to try to figure out some of these answers. And they did an in-body scan and determined that she needed a whole lot more protein than she was getting. I guess she was getting 30 to 50 grams or whatever, and they upped it to about 100 grams a day, which seems like an enormous amount. But she lost weight and gained muscle, and she felt really good afterwards. And she said that, and then there was another student who also did that. But this is a piece, I'm curious what you guys think about this. This student did this in-body scan that was in her gym, because that's the other thing, is when they're accessible, when the tools are accessible and free, right? That's a different story. But she learned from it, but she didn't believe it. And this is the other thing that I'm finding from students. Nobody trusts anything or anybody or any messaging anymore. They're just they just don't know who to trust, or because they know that TikTok influencers are being paid for a lot of things, and so they don't necessarily trust everybody, but they do trust quite a few people, or they'll try something. But they also don't even necessarily trust tech. I don't know. I find that an aspect of this whole thing that is very much around the generation.
I think that is really interesting. And particularly because some of the kind of buzz that I've heard is that um, the younger generations aren't as trusting, or they don't
Yeah.
care as much about certification. So, if you have
Oh,
something like USD or organic and they don't trust in that, but yet they're trusting more in things like purity testing, or testing for glyphosate, or testing for different heavy metals. So I think it's really interesting because we think about, I mean, maybe I'm going off on a tangent, but certifications is kind of the ultimate way to trust in something, but actually we're seeing them kind of lean the other direction. I don't know if you have any indication of what other kind of attributes or things that they're looking for in the lives that they're leading, or their lifestyles, or the products they're buying, or
so it's interesting. I think the jury is out on certifications at the moment with my students. They kind of believe it. They know that organic means something more than conventional. But again, just historically, consumers always think of organic as a checkbox, right? No pesticide, no antibiotics, no, 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 no. And I think that they also feel that way. One little step in there, which is that their parents buy organic and they trust their parents. So that's an interesting thing. The newer stuff, there's a prove it to me mentality where it's like when my student was talking about the in-body scan, and she said, but the data, some of the data was completely wrong. And so if there's any kind of indication that it's not 100%, they get into a place of like, I don't know if I can really trust this. So I think they're trying to figure out who they can trust, but there's no 100% on anything, really. At least that's the feeling I get from classes and people.
Yeah, and it does feel like there's an interesting tension there because you talked about students wanting data. Like they are data driven, your students. And yes, I think there's the business school piece of that we have to take into consideration. But that's how they're thinking about things. That's how they're making decisions. But then what is the source of that data? And really using a lot of discernment around applying a lot of discernment to where they're getting the information, how they're getting it, and how they're applying it. But even before that, what you said just generally around, really like going through these processes with technology and engaging with technology in the places that they're already at. So like when something's available at the gym, these whole body scans, taking that information, doing something with it, measuring the results, they kind of are going through that whole personalization process that we've been talking about. But then that piece of it, and I'm glad we're narrowing in on that, of just like, well, what do they trust and how do they actually get that information that they're going to feel fully confident in? So what are you seeing? Like, how are they fact checking that? How are they double checking it? And have you seen any credible sources of data that your students are like, yes, that is accurate?
I don't think there is one source of data that they trust. It might have been, some governmental sources or whatnot, but right now that's not something that they necessarily trust because so much is changing and we're in a funny place. But I do think that they continuously go for more research. I'm kind of surprised by this because, when I was growing up, I think of going to college and going to parties and having fun. And yes, studying some, but like, let's go have fun. Whereas, they'll take the time. Like this one student who I said, can you just share the experience you had with this body scan thing? She sent me 3 or 4 paragraphs having looked into different types of body scans. She's like, there's one, I want to make sure I know this. The DEXA scan is actually the gold standard for body compositions. I mean, they don't stop at one source. They really will check something out from a variety of different places. So they might hear something from TikTok, but then they'll go and do a little bit more research. AI is still kind of questionable, but I think that might be coming from the fact that we're in a college where a lot of professors, not me, a lot of professors will say that it's cheating to use AI, whereas I say use it as much as you can. That's the reality of our world. But they're getting these mixed messages, so they're just not 100% safe in that area.
I have to say that I do kind of appreciate, though, that dose of skepticism from college students, because that's when you're supposed to be skeptical, right?
Sure.
That's where the student movements come from, and that healthy dose of skepticism. And I come from also going to college and going to parties, so we wouldn't have turned in those 4 paragraphs, but I do appreciate that they care.
Premier Research Labs, PRL, founded in 1987 by visionaries Dr. Robert Marshall and Dr. Linda Forbes, is a trailblazer in professional-grade nutritional supplements, driven by purity, fueled by innovation, and unwavering in its commitment to uncompromising quality. Born from the conviction that not all supplements are created equal, PRL redefined the industry with excipient-free, 100% plant-based formulas, solvent-free capsules, and extraordinary manufacturing practices that honor the body and the earth. With rigorous orthogonal and energetic testing, rejecting over 70% of raw materials that did not meet our exacting standards, PRL sets a premier benchmark for safety, potency, and trust. Guided by our mission to transform global wellness and anchored in the core values of transformation, extraordinary, and community, PRL empowers practitioners, patients, and conscious consumers to pursue optimal vitality, continuing to inspire a healthier, more connected world for today and for generations to come.
Cynthia, how do you think that this has changed? Because, okay, so when I first met you, it was a long
A
time
long
ago.
time
We
ago.
don't need we don't need to go down that path. But it was a long time ago. And you were working with students
Mm-hmm.
then through Protect Our Breasts and at University of Massachusetts. You saw students, and I've always worked with you with this group of students who are passionate about research and science, and they're committed to making the world a healthier place. But I would imagine the process has changed, or some of the things that they're thinking about has changed. So I guess comparing Gen Zs that you've worked with to millennials that you worked with, what are you seeing as the big difference there with how they look at information and how they interpret data?
So I would say that the millennial generation learned to do the research, but didn't have the same misgivings, the same level of misgivings because of the misinformation. And again, I certainly don't want to go down this track except to say that I think with everything that's happening in our country, the fear of misinformation, the distrust of all information has just exploded for them. They're now in a place where they really don't know who to trust. They don't trust the media anymore because it seems so divisive. They don't trust the government sources anymore because so many of them have been reduced or whatever. So they're kind of in a place of home. They trust their parents, right? They trust their parents, their family. They don't have enough experience in their lives to feel like they can even trust themselves yet, which I think is so interesting. They still feel like they've got to double check a lot. Whereas with millennials, and also, of course, a lot of that had to do with COVID too, right? They didn't trust that we
Right.
were all going to be fine and dandy. Whereas millennials before COVID started doing research, but more out of curiosity and, feeling like, well, we should find out more information. Whereas now it feels a little bit more intense. I'm not sure how to put it, but yeah.
Yeah, like living in one big fact check. Like rather than like curiosity
It's
driven, more like I better
paralyzed by
double, triple.
information.
Well,
That's a
that's
stressful
true.
place to be in. But to your point, Adrienne, I think leads to really, really like hyper vigilant and responsible consumers of the future. And as that relates to the CPG industry, oh my gosh, like
Huge.
Adrienne and I talk about differentiation. We were just talking with a group of retailers today about that topic. How do brands really stand out? Knowing that your current or future consumers and Gen Z are researching in this way, and like they're going to call you out on your BS if it's not legit. The science you're putting out there, the claims you're putting out there, even some certifications. So that's an interesting dynamic, I think.
It's interesting that you bring that up because teaching marketing for health and wellness, of course, I'm all about all of that. And positioning was this topic today, literally right before we jumped on this Zoom. And I was talking, I changed things up for the first time. And I started the positioning strategy with really looking at the backstory of the founders and the reason that you're a brand. And that's quite different than how I might have described positioning before, right? Understanding your target market and their values and all that was always first. But now, I don't know, it feels like understanding the value set of the founder and the reason that you exist at all needs to be a priority in any kind of brand as they think about sharing because you just said transparency and
Mhm.
authenticity matter more than anything. And literally, this is why Shelf Sense was started because I had a student say to me, I just want to know more about the company that I'm buying products from. It's not enough to see their advertising or their product label or the website even. I want to know like what matters to them and is it consistent with how I feel? And so that's legit. And I think that's going to be the future for a lot of brands that they have to think about that.
Well, and that's
If I wasn't like burning up in here, I would be getting the chills because, like so many things with you, Cynthia, the stars are aligning. Adrienne, maybe you're going to talk about this, but the call we had this
yes.
morning, it's like, yes.
What's
That's what
that?
we talked about with the retailer group that we talked to this morning, storytelling and just how important
Storytelling.
that is and how really that's everything and not just in getting different values across like regenerative agriculture and helping explain what that is to consumers, but just the story of the brand itself, why they're in it, what they're doing,
Yeah,
and how they're different.
absolutely. They have to because that's what Gen Z is going to look for. They want to know the
Yeah.
whole story, not just the label. As you said, certification is nice, a little bit of information on their package, but they really want to know it all. And literally that's why Shelf Sense is called Stories Behind Our Stuff, because we don't know all the stories. Like I'm about to do a chocolate version with Joe Winnie from, Theo's and Now Magic. And there's so much about chocolate that this generation doesn't necessarily know. Millennials probably remember all about the exploitation of Ivory Coast and whatnot, but this generation is new, and I forget that sometimes, especially since I've been teaching a long time. It's like forget that they don't know some of the things that we just take for granted and that we look at brands to solve those problems. But Gen Z doesn't even know there's a problem necessarily, right? So, kind of reinforcing that and telling the story of the issue and the solution, like bringing up the important stuff, but then showing why this product really is trying to work towards something better. And there's data behind that too that says, you have to actually have a solution for a Gen Z buyer. Like they have to feel like you're contributing to climate improvement and, all sorts of other things. Like they have to know that you care.
I think this generation has been so surprising in many ways. I mean, I feel like we were headed down this path where everyone was saying, "Oh, the younger generations, they have no attention span. They don't care. They just watch TikTok videos that are quick and quick and easy. They're not going to go into stores. They do everything online." And actually, the data is showing that Gen Z is going into stores.
Yeah,
They're back in brick and mortar. They're what you were saying that taking all that time to really research and look deeply at things. And I think that that's been a really eye-opening surprise on so many levels.
sure. Yes, the lack of attention is still there, though. Let me tell you.
You're like, no, most of that's right.
They're six, they're so fast. As they scroll, right? But they also have that attention span,
Yeah.
but they are a lot of information.
Cynthia, are there other topics that are really like, you know, becoming significant conversations in your classes with your students? I just think it's so fascinating that you're working with probably like students who will be the future
Yeah.
leaders of CPG companies and many of them in the natural and organic product industry. I mean, that's coming from your group. So what are they talking about? What are some of the other things that over the past couple months
Mhm.
are really standing out?
Well, I think it's really it's interesting to look at how I've kind of shared this course by looking at food and beverage and then looked at supplements, herbs and supplements, and then looked at beauty and kind of went through the subcategories with everyone and tried to kind of see their responses and if those responses are around a particular industry or how they were responding to it. And it just seems to me that they're concerned overall with health and wellness, the very broad subject,
Mm.
because they don't. I know it seems kind of too general, but I really feel like that's the piece. They're hungry for this information. They know that something's not quite right on the conventional store shelves. They just know it intuitively. And they know, and maybe that's because their parents have been buying some organic products or whatever, and they learned about safer, cleaner beauty at school or something. But I feel like this whole movement towards, and we started here, so full circle, around fitness, right? Around how can I live my best self? I'm doing this project with the advertising class where they've been assigned a public health class, sleep, nutrition, alcohol consumption, right? So these different topics, and they need to come up with campaigns for Gen Zs. And so many of the concepts or the way these students are going to come at the creative are around general, like sleep, for example. They look at sleep not as, get 8 hours of sleep. It's more, you know, if you get enough sleep, your brain is going to work better. You're going to have more energy during the day. Like they're starting to look at these various activities, these life changes that they could make. Like, for example, today I dropped anti-cancer lifestyle, and there were so many things in there that students said to me, we could make these little changes. They get nervous when there are big changes, but little changes, if you want me to try to get a cast iron pan for my apartment, I can probably do that. But don't hit me with, I have to buy all new products. Like, don't tell me my makeup bag has to completely be changed out. And so, I mean, I've been hearing that for 15 years, but it's different today. Today, it's almost as if they really want to make those changes. And I know that sounds like kind of a generic overview of what they're talking about, but that is kind of what they're talking about, is general health and wellness.
I feel like that makes so much sense, though.
Yeah.
And it actually, I like it in the context of this conversation because, yes, we kind of started there, but we also started with more information, more data,
Yes.
peeling back the layers, which that's important. But taking a step back from all of that and just being and you mentioned it too, Cynthia, and you're like, here's why we do the work that we do. It's to make people healthier and the world a healthier place. Like that high level vision of why these small changes or changes to products or lifestyle, how all of that, the outcomes are ultimately about making people healthier.
Yeah.
And just that feels very in line with kind of bigger conversations happening now of just making healthier, better products mainstream and why that's catching on. It's a simple message of improving health.
It's simple,
right?
Yes, but there have been big changes, and maybe this is worth a whole another podcast.
Yes.
They don't drink.
Yes.
I mean it. I was kind of surprised. I mean, mocktails I knew were growing, but it's different than that actually on the campus because mocktails in their head are very expensive. Most of them have no money. They are very poor and they're trying to do part-time jobs. And, they just don't have the money for those kinds of indulgences. But they still aren't drinking like they did. They will have maybe one drink and then have a lot less throughout the night. And I can find out some more anecdotal information around this because I think it's worth really diving deep on what's actually happening. Because as I look at the data, it's a little different being on this campus and hearing what they're doing versus what I'm reading in the research. So might be another topic someday.
So stay tuned.
Not that I'm inviting myself, right?
Let's do it.
Please. Oh, this is great, Cynthia. Yes. Well, we could have 5 follow-up episodes. We would love to have you on again. This is so much fun, and you have such great insights.
Thank you.
We will have more discussions to come. But anything else, Cynthia, that you wanted to share before we wrap up today?
Just that again, I'm just so grateful that we're in this industry together and that we get to do this work and the people who we get to work with. I don't know if this happened on your retailer calls or just general calls anywhere. I just feel like the people who are in this industry are really, really devoted to making the change that the world needs. And Gen Zs feel that from us. They just feel it. And I feel very grateful to be a part of it.
Adrienne, you and I should not say anything. We will ruin that.
I know.